The millionaire was sick, and the poor girl who watched him decided to approach. He had been in a coma for months, forgotten by everyone, except her. Every night the poor girl appeared at the hospital and stood in front of his room, until one day she entered and the impossible began to happen. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. St. Vincent's Hospital never completely slept. Even in the quietest early hours, there was always the constant murmur of machines, the distant echo of footsteps through the corridors, and that artificial light that never went out. It was in this environment that she appeared, a girl of no more than 8 years old, with disheveled brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets too ancient for her age. She walked barefoot through the nearly empty corridors, her small feet making an almost imperceptible noise against the cold floor. Her attentive eyes absorbed every detail with a mixture of innocence and restlessness that disconcerted anyone who observed her long enough. She always appeared when the world slowed down, when the noises of routine dissipated, and only the muffled sound of machines and thoughts suspended in the air remained. Dr. Edward Sanders, a neurologist at the hospital for 15 years, was the first to notice the pattern. He frequently worked during night shifts, preferring the silence to analyze complex cases and review medical records. It was during one of these nights that he saw her for the first time, standing in front of room 418, where one of his most enigmatic patients rested. The man in room 418 was a medical mystery. He had arrived at the hospital 3 years ago, after a car accident that should have been fatal. Against all expectations, he survived, but had remained in a deep coma since then. Tests showed minimal brain activity, almost non-existent reflexes. He was one of those cases that medicine classified as permanently vegetative, although Dr. Sanders always hesitated to use that term. There was something about that man, a presence that seemed to resist the void. The girl always stopped in front of the glass room, where the patient's motionless body had been resting for months, perhaps years. A man suspended between absence and waiting, forgotten by many, but never by her. Dr. Sanders watched, fascinated, how she behaved. There was no hurry in her movements, no nervousness typical of lost children. On the contrary, there was a disturbing calmness, as if she were exactly where she should be. This child was not just a spectator. Something in her vibrated in sync with what was behind the glass. She would sit on the cold floor, rest her chin on her knees, and stay there motionless, as if listening to something others couldn't capture. The silence between them was not empty. It was loaded with intention, with a communication that transcended the physical barriers of glass and unconsciousness. During the first days of observing her, Dr. Sanders thought about approaching the girl, asking who she was, how she had entered the hospital where her parents were. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the serenity with which she carried herself, or the feeling that interrupting that moment would be a violation of something sacred. He decided to just observe, mentally document her visits. The appearances followed a pattern. Always after midnight, when the hospital's activity drastically decreased, she appeared out of nowhere, as if materializing from the shadows of the corridors. She walked directly to room 418, without hesitation, without looking sideways. It was as if she knew the path by heart, as if that ritual had been repeated for much longer than Dr. Sanders could imagine. During the day, no one saw her. Dr. Sanders discreetly questioned other employees, but none reported sightings of the girl during day shifts. At night, she became part of the hospital, a presence few noticed and even fewer questioned. The few who crossed paths with her thought it was imagination or a reflection of the typical exhaustion of night shifts. Nurse Helen, an experienced professional who had worked in the ICU for more than 20 years, was the second person to report sightings. Initially, she mentioned it only in passing, during a casual conversation in the break room. "Doctor, have you seen that girl who roams the corridors at night?" The question was asked cautiously, as one who fears being judged for seeing things. "You've seen her too?" Dr. Sanders couldn't hide the curiosity in his voice. "Several times, always near Mr. August's room." She was referring to the patient in 418, whose full name was August Mitchell Peterson, a 45-year-old man who, before the accident, had been a prominent figure in the community, a wealthy businessman, philanthropist, but also someone very private about his personal life. "And you found it strange?" Helen paused as if organizing confused thoughts. "It's hard to explain, Doctor. She doesn't seem lost, doesn't seem to be looking for anyone. It's as if she were visiting someone she knows." This observation disturbed Dr. Sanders more than he would like to admit. He began to pay even more attention to the girl's nightly visits and gradually noticed details that had initially gone unnoticed. The way she lightly touched the glass of the room, always at the same height, as if waving. The movements of her lips, suggesting that she spoke softly, perhaps whispered something to the unconscious man. An attentive observer, an experienced and solitary professional like Dr. Sanders, began to mentally document each visit. The nightly visits, the calm behavior, the almost ritualistic repetition of movements. Something in that presence provoked an old restlessness, as if memory touched something forgotten long ago. It was during one of these silent observations that Dr. Sanders noticed something extraordinary. On a Thursday night, while the girl remained seated in front of the room, August's cardiac monitors showed a slight alteration. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle acceleration of the heart rate, but enough to draw attention. When she got up to leave, the heartbeats returned to their previous pattern. Coincidence, he initially thought, but the next night, the same pattern repeated, and the next as well. Dr. Sanders began to note the times, the cardiac patterns, any changes in August's vital signs during the mysterious girl's visits. The data began to form an intriguing picture. Whenever she was present, there were small changes in August's monitors, never enough to trigger automatic alarms, but consistent enough to suggest that something was happening. It was as if her presence provoked some kind of response in the comatose patient. Dr. Sanders knew he was entering dangerous territory for a doctor. Medicine was based on facts, on measurable evidence, on rational explanations. But there were cases that defied this logic, situations that science still couldn't fully explain, and this seemed to be one of them. On Friday of that week, he decided to observe longer. He positioned himself strategically at the nursing station, from where he had a clear view of the corridor leading to room 418. When the girl appeared, punctually after midnight, Dr. Sanders was prepared. He observed her every movement with scientific attention, but also with a deeply human curiosity. There was something about the way she walked, in the silent determination of her steps, that suggested a mission. She wasn't a lost or frightened child. She was someone with purpose, even if that purpose remained incomprehensible to observers. When she approached the glass of the room, Dr. Sanders clearly saw how her lips moved. She was definitely talking, whispering something to the unconscious man, and at that moment August's monitors reacted more intensely than on previous occasions. His heart rate accelerated, brainwave patterns showed small peaks of activity. Something was happening there, something that defied his medical understanding, but that could no longer be ignored or attributed to chance. Dr. Sanders knew he needed more evidence before sharing his observations with anyone. Medicine did not forgive theories based solely on intuition, and he could not risk his professional reputation with unfounded speculation. He decided to discreetly install a small security camera focused on the corridor near room 418, something he justified as a preventative measure to monitor access by unauthorized visitors. The first recording confirmed his suspicions. The girl really appeared every night, always at the same time, always with the same silent routine. But it was on the third night of recording that something extraordinary happened, something that would completely change the course of investigations. One early morning, she crossed the glass barrier. Dr. Sanders was reviewing records in his office when the silent alarm of room 418's door chimed on his pager. He ran through the corridors, expecting to find some staff member doing a routine check, but what he saw left him speechless. The girl was inside the room, next to August's bed. She had approached with silent reverence and now remained there, motionless, looking at the face of the unconscious man. Her small hands were extended over his chest, not touching but maintaining a minimal distance, as if there was some kind of energy flowing between them. Dr. Sanders remained at the entrance, fearing that any movement might break that extraordinary moment. It was then that she whispered something inaudible, words that seemed to carry an immense emotional weight, and at the same instant, the monitors reacted dramatically. Subtle signals, but undeniable to an experienced doctor. Small sparks in an almost shut-down system. The electroencephalogram showed peaks of activity that had not been recorded for months. The heart monitor accelerated to a rhythm closer to normal. Even August's breathing, which for years had been maintained artificially, showed signs of his own effort. It was as if something dormant inside him was being awakened by the presence of that mysterious child. When the on-duty professionals ran in after hearing the equipment alerts, she was already moving away, leaving only a presence in the air and a look that seemed to contain centuries of wisdom concentrated in a childish face. Dr. Sanders saw her disappear down the corridor with the same naturalness with which she had appeared, as if she were made of the very substance of hospital shadows. "Doctor, what happened here?" Nurse Helen arrived breathless, followed by the on-duty technician. "I'm not exactly sure," replied Dr. Sanders, still processing what he had witnessed. "But look at the monitors. Something has changed." The clinical data was reviewed, and the graphs were examined with increasing incredulity. The improvements in August's condition didn't follow any known medical logic. Each new sign, a deeper breath, a finger that moved almost imperceptibly, a facial muscle that responded to stimuli, seemed to occur after the girl's visits. The next day, during the morning patient review, Dr. Sanders found something that made him question everything he knew about the case. A piece of paper was folded under the armchair in August's room. It had a drawing made with childish lines and words that seemed scribbled by small but firm hands. The drawing showed two figures, a man lying in a bed and a girl beside him, with a strange luminosity between them. Below, written in shaky but determined handwriting, was a phrase that made Dr. Sanders' heart race. "Daddy, I'm here. Don't forget me." Helen, who had helped him examine the paper, couldn't hold back her tears when she saw the message. That handwriting was familiar, in a way she couldn't explain. She knew exactly where it came from, though she had never told anyone about her own suspicions. "Doctor," said Helen with a choked voice, "I need to tell you something. About this girl, about this patient. There are things I've never officially reported." They went to Dr. Sanders' office, where Helen revealed information she had kept for years. 3 years ago, when August was admitted to the hospital after the accident, he wasn't alone in the car. There was a child with him, a girl of approximately 5 years old. She had been taken to the pediatric emergency room, but her injuries were minor. The strange thing was that there were no records of kinship, no document that identified her as his daughter. The social workers came, asked questions, but the girl wouldn't talk about family. She only said that she needed to stay close to her daddy. After 3 days of hospitalization for observation, she simply disappeared. The records were filed as an unresolved case, and over time everyone forgot. "But you didn't forget," observed Dr. Sanders. "No, because I saw her several times after that, always at night, always in the corridors. At first, I thought it was my imagination, work stress, but she was always there, like a silent ghost that no one else noticed." The truth began to insinuate itself like an electric current among Dr. Sanders' thoughts. August wasn't just an ordinary patient. After Helen's account, he decided to investigate the background of the man who rested in room 418 more deeply. The research revealed surprising information. August Mitchell Peterson had been not only a successful businessman, but also someone deeply involved in research on effective memory and deep consciousness. His company funded projects at renowned universities, studies on the ability of emotional connection to transcend physical and neurological barriers. Even more intriguing was discovering that August had lost a daughter years before the accident. The information was scarce, buried in confidential reports and files of cases closed without explanations. Apparently, there had been some kind of experiment or experimental treatment that went wrong, or too right, and was therefore silenced by the authorities. Dr. Sanders found vague references to a project called Memory Bridge, developed in partnership with St. Vincent's Hospital. The project investigated whether deep emotional bonds could establish communication beyond conventional limitations of consciousness. The studies were abruptly interrupted. All records were sealed and the professionals involved were transferred or dismissed. A former employee, now relegated to maintenance tasks, began to show nervousness when Dr. Sanders asked discreet questions about the period. Mr. Jack had worked as a laboratory technician 3 years ago and knew details about experiments he preferred to forget. It was he who reluctantly admitted to having been a witness and perhaps an accomplice to a forced interruption. "Doctor, there are things that are better left buried," said Jack. his hands trembling slightly as he organized equipment in the hospital basement. That project messed with forces we didn't fully understand. When they stopped everything, it was because something had gone very right, not wrong. And that scared the right people. What exactly happened? The girl, she could communicate with her father even when he was sedated for procedures. Not just that, she could access his memories, share experiences she had never lived. It was as if they were a single consciousness divided into two bodies. Jack explained that the experiments were interrupted when they realized that the connection between father and daughter was becoming permanent. The girl began to manifest knowledge and memories that belonged exclusively to August. She talked about business he conducted, mentioned people she had never met, demonstrated understanding of complex concepts totally inappropriate for her age. That's when they decided to separate them. They said it was for her own good so she could have a normal childhood. But August was desperate. He threatened to expose everything, sue the hospital, ruin the career of anyone involved. And after that? Then came the accident. Very convenient, if you ask me. And the girl, well, officially she was placed in state custody. Unofficially. Jack made a significant pause. She never really left here. The weeks passed with Dr. Sanders collecting more evidence, documenting each appearance of the girl, each reaction from August. The child continued coming, now bringing small objects that she discreetly left in the room. A faded hair ribbon, a children's book with an almost illegible dedication, a hand-sewn fabric toy. Each item seemed to carry a specific function, as if they were keys designed to activate something dormant inside that body, which little by little gave increasingly evident signs of fighting against the emptiness of unconsciousness. Amid the growing evidence of an inexplicable recovery, the high echelons of the institution began to pressure for decisions that Dr. Sanders knew were premature and potentially disastrous. Hospital protocol required the removal of patients in prolonged coma after a certain period, especially when resources were needed for cases with more favorable prognoses. Dr. Robert Miller, the hospital's clinical director, and a man known for his purely administrative approach, called a meeting that Dr. Sanders had feared since the beginning of his investigations. The agenda was clear: transferring August to a long-term care facility where he would await a fate that everyone knew, but no one dared verbalize. Edward, you know the numbers. 3 years without significant signs of recovery. This hospital's resources are limited, and we have a waiting list of patients who could benefit from the bed and equipment that Mr. Peterson is occupying. Dr. Miller, with all due respect, we've begun to observe signs of improvement in recent weeks. Small but consistent. It would be premature to transfer him now. Signs of improvement? The director flipped through the chart with skepticism. I don't see anything here that indicates clinically significant changes. Some occasional spikes on the monitors, variations that can be attributed to normal fluctuations or equipment failures. Dr. Sanders knew that his observations about the mysterious girl would not be well received in an administrative discussion. How could he explain that the patient's recovery seemed to be directly related to the nightly visits of a child who officially did not exist in hospital records? He decided to focus on measurable medical data. The brain waves show different patterns. Spontaneous breathing has increased in frequency. There are reflexes that didn't exist 6 months ago. I need more time to properly document these changes. Time is exactly what we don't have. The transfer is scheduled for next week. End of discussion. Time was running out, and Dr. Sanders knew he needed allies if he wanted to prevent a decision that could interrupt an extraordinary recovery process. That's when he sought out Helen, knowing she had become as invested in the case as he was. Helen, I need your help. You have access to the old administration files, right? I need everything you can find about the Memory Bridge project. Doctor, this could be dangerous for both of us. If they discover we're investigating archived cases, and if we don't investigate, a man may lose the only chance of recovery he's had in 3 years. Besides, a child may lose the only bond she has with the world. Helen agreed, driven by the same intuition that had kept Dr. Sanders alert for weeks. Together, they spent the following night searching through files in the hospital basement, in dusty rooms where old documents were stored before permanent digitization. It was Helen who found the dossier that would change everything. Inside a folder marked only as MB Archived, there were dozens of documents, photographs, medical reports, and even recordings on old cassette tapes. The material documented a research project that had lasted 2 years and involved some of the brightest minds in national neurology. The photographs showed August in his private laboratory, a state-of-the-art facility that occupied an entire wing of the hospital. At his side, always present, was a small girl with the same brown hair and deep eyes that wandered the night corridors 3 years later. The resemblance was undeniable. It was the same child, just a few years younger. The reports revealed that the Memory Bridge project had obtained extraordinary results in understanding deep emotional bonds between parents and children. August and his daughter Sophie had been the main research subjects, but not as guinea pigs, as voluntary collaborators in a study that August funded and actively participated in. "Look at this," Helen pointed to a report dated 3 years ago. Sophie wasn't just August's daughter. She had been diagnosed with a rare form of neurological disorder that affected her ability to form long-term memories. The project was specifically developed to help her. Dr. Sanders read with growing fascination. Sophie's disorder caused her to progressively lose memories of her experiences, but maintain intact the emotional connection with important people in her life. August had developed a theory that deep affective bonds could transcend conventional neurological limitations. The experiments showed that Sophie could access August's memories even when her own memories failed. It was as if the love between father and daughter created a neurological bridge that allowed the sharing of experiences and knowledge. Even more impressive, the connection worked in both directions. When Sophie was present, August's cognitive abilities were significantly intensified. A particularly touching recording showed father and daughter during an experimental session. August's voice, laden with emotion, explained, "Sophie, if one day I forget who we are, if my mind can't find me, you'll be my bridge back. You are my living memory. And if I forget, Daddy?" Sophie's childish voice was clear in the recording. "Then I'll be your memory. We are one divided into 2 bodies. Nothing can break this, not distance, not time, not any force in this world." Helen and Dr. Sanders looked at each other, finally understanding the magnitude of what they were witnessing in the hospital. Sophie hadn't disappeared after the accident. She had remained, keeping the promise made during the experiments, serving as a memory bridge to bring her father back to consciousness. The documents also revealed the reason for the abrupt interruption of the project. The results had become so extraordinary that they drew the attention of authorities concerned with the ethical and scientific implications. There was pressure for the experiments to be stopped, fears that they were permanently altering the neurological structures of the participants. August had resisted, arguing that the benefits for Sophie outweighed any theoretical risk. That's when accidents began to happen. Equipment failing, funding being cut, professionals being transferred. The pressure increased until August decided to leave the country with Sophie, preserving the research and protecting his daughter. The accident that brought them back to the hospital hadn't been a coincidence, the last document in the folder suggested. There was evidence that forces interested in definitively ending the project had orchestrated events to force their return. The plan was to permanently separate father and daughter, erasing any trace of the experiments. But something went wrong. August entered a deep coma, and Sophie found a way to remain close, even when everyone believed she had been removed from the hospital. Her neurological condition, combined with the trauma of the accident, had created a unique situation. She existed in a liminal state between present reality and the memories shared with her father. "Helen," Dr. Sanders whispered, processing the implications. "She's not just visiting August, she's keeping his mind functioning, preserving the memories that the trauma of the accident damaged. And if we separate her now, he may never wake up again." At that moment, they understood that they were facing something much bigger than a complex medical case. They were witnessing the manifestation of a love that had transcended physical limitations, creating its own reality to preserve a vital connection. Administrative decisions began to override human care, but Dr. Sanders, now armed with historical evidence of the case, knew he needed to take a stand, not just as a doctor, but as a guardian of something extraordinary that conventional science was not yet prepared to accept. Conflicts multiplied when he presented his formal opposition to August's transfer. A quiet, dedicated employee who had observed his investigations with growing interest began to frequent the vicinity of the room with unusual frequency. Her eyes revealed a past she had never dared to tell. It was Carmen from the cleaning staff who had worked at the hospital for more than 20 years. It was she who, long ago, had discreetly erased the records of a child hospitalized for a few days. A child with no apparent relatives, with signs of abandonment, but who didn't seem lost. She seemed to be looking for something that only she knew where to find. Carmen approached Dr. Sanders and Helen 3 days before August's scheduled transfer. Her calloused hands trembled slightly when she handed over a small box she had kept for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. "Doctors, I couldn't stay silent anymore. This box belonged to Mr. August. I found it in the pocket of his coat on the night of the accident. I never turned it in because I knew he would want his daughter to have access to it." Inside the box was a recording on a modern digital device, some photographs and a handwritten letter. The letter, written in August's careful handwriting, was addressed to Sophie, my eternal bridge. Dr. Sanders played the recording, and August's familiar voice filled the small office. "Sophie, if you're listening to this, it means something has happened to me, and you're using our connection to find me. Remember what we always said. You are my memory when I forget, and I am your memory when you need to remember. This recording is my way of leaving a clue for you to bring me back." The recording continued with August describing intimate details of their lives together, specific memories that only they shared, emotional codes they had developed during the experiments. He also explained his most important discovery, that true love created real, measurable neurological connections that could transcend physical limitations. What others call mysticism, we know is science not yet understood. Our connection is real, Sophie. Use it to find me, use it to bring me back. Bring me, and when I awaken, we will continue our journey together. Helen cried openly upon hearing the recording. He knew something was going to happen, and prepared this for her. "But how will she hear it?" Dr. Sanders asked. "She only appears at night, and even then only for a few minutes." It was Carmen who offered the answer. "She'll know." Sophie always knew when there was something important waiting for her. "Leave the recording in her father's room tonight. She'll find it." That night, Dr. Sanders, Helen, and Carmen gathered discreetly in room 418. They had positioned the small recorder on the bedside table, along with the photographs and the letter. August's monitors showed more agitated patterns than normal, as if he sensed that something important was about to happen. Midnight passed with no sign of Sophie. 1 o'clock in the morning, then 2. Dr. Sanders began to fear that something had changed, that the mysterious connection had been interrupted somehow. It was then that she appeared, not through the corridors as always, but from within the room itself, as if she had materialized from the shadows near her father's bed. Not alone. Behind her, a small group of people who over the last few weeks had crossed the same corridors with suspicious looks. Helen, Carmen, Jack from maintenance, and 2 other night staff who had witnessed the inexplicable phenomena. Each of them had felt the call in different ways, and now they were there, not to witness, but to be part of the revelation. Sophie looked at each of them with a serenity that didn't match her apparent age. Her eyes carried an ancient wisdom, as if they were windows to 2 interconnected consciousnesses. She walked to the bedside table, picked up the recorder, and for the first time since Dr. Sanders had begun his observations, spoke with a clear and audible voice. "Daddy always leaves clues for me. Even when he sleeps, he's speaking." She activated the recording, and August's voice filled the room. As the familiar words flowed, something extraordinary began to happen. The cardiac monitors accelerated to rhythms close to normal. The electroencephalogram showed waves of activity that hadn't been recorded for years. More impressive still, August's facial muscles began to contract slightly, as if he were trying to form words. Sophie approached the bed and placed her small hands on her father's chest. "Daddy, I kept our bridge. Every night I brought our memories back to you. Now you can wake up." It was then that the moment occurred that would forever change those presents' understanding of the limits between science and love. August's eyes opened slowly, vaguely at first, but with growing direction. He looked directly at Sophie, and for the first time in 3 years his mouth moved to form a word. Sophie. The commotion was silent and profound. No one shouted. No one ran to call other doctors. There was an intrinsic understanding that they were witnessing something sacred, something that could not be explained by conventional medical protocols. "Daddy, do you remember me?" Sophie whispered, her own tears mixing with those of everyone present. I remember everything, August replied with a hoarse but clear voice. You were my memory when I couldn't remember. You were my bridge back. In the days that followed, August's recovery defied all medical expectations. Gradually, his motor functions returned, his speech became more fluid, his consciousness expanded to encompass not only his own memories, but also the experiences that Sophie had lived during the 3 years he was unconscious. Even more intriguing, Sophie began to show signs of improvement in her own neurological condition. The memory failures that had tormented her since childhood significantly decreased. It was as if the reconnection with her father had restored neurological circuits that had been dormant. Dr. Sanders meticulously documented every aspect of the recovery, knowing he was witnessing something that redefined the limits of medical knowledge. The reports he wrote would become legendary in neurological circles, although many colleagues remained skeptical about the extraordinary circumstances of the recovery. The hospital administration, faced with a recovery that couldn't be explained but couldn't be denied, decided to discreetly shelve the transfer plans. Dr. Robert Miller, the clinical director, never asked questions about the unconventional methods used, satisfied only with the fact that the hospital had avoided a potential scandal. August, now fully conscious, explained to Dr. Sanders the scientific aspects of what had happened. Doctor, what we experienced wasn't a miracle in the mystical sense, but rather the manifestation of neurological phenomena that science still doesn't fully understand. Love creates real connections in the brain, establishes communication patterns that can transcend physical limitations. And Sophie? Sophie was my anchor. During the coma, I was lost in an ocean of unconsciousness, but she maintained a constant connection line. Her nightly visits weren't just symbolic. They were real therapeutic sessions, gradually restoring my ability to return to full consciousness. 3 months after the awakening, August and Sophie were preparing to leave the hospital. His recovery was complete, and she had found peace in knowing that her promise had been fulfilled. On the last night before discharge, they visited each of the staff members who had participated in their extraordinary journey. For Dr. Sanders, August left a proposal to continue research on effective neurological connections, but this time with official support and the necessary resources to properly explore the phenomena they had witnessed. Doctor, what we lived through here was just the beginning. There is much more to discover about the capabilities of the human brain when motivated by genuine love. For Helen, Carmen, Jack, and the others, he left letters of gratitude that recognized the fundamental role each had played in preserving something extraordinary. You were guardians of a mystery that could have been lost forever. On the morning of their departure, Sophie said goodbye to room 418, where she had spent so many nights keeping alive the connection with her father. She lightly touched the glass one last time and whispered, "Thank you for letting me take care of Daddy. Now he's okay." Dr. Sanders observed father and daughter walking through the same corridors where she had wandered as a mysterious presence. Now, she walked with the confidence of a child who had accomplished an impossible mission, beside the father who had returned from the threshold between life and absence. In that place where science frequently confronted the inexplicable, everyone, from the most skeptical to the most sensitive, came to respect a new kind of protocol. One that isn't written on medical forms, but that is engraved in the soul of those who understand that true love can literally bring someone back to life. Years later, when Dr. Sanders became director of the renovated Effective Neurology Research Program at St. Vincent's Hospital, he always told new residents the story of Sophie and August, not as a legend or medical curiosity, but as evidence that there is still much to discover about the extraordinary potential of the human brain when guided by the purest love that exists, that between a father and his daughter. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Sophie and August's story has touched your hearts as deeply as it touched ours. This narrative reminds us that true love can create connections that transcend all limitations, be they physical, medical, or even scientific. To continue this emotional journey with us, we've prepared a special playlist with other equally touching and inspiring stories. You can find it by clicking right here. If this story moved you as much as it moved us to tell it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the beauty and complexity of the human condition, Stories that make us believe in the transformative power of love and hope. Don't miss our upcoming content and tell us in the comments which moment touched you most in this story. We're eager to hear your reflections and share more stories that warm the heart and nourish the soul.